Okay. Okay, before we start, two things that we always have discussion group afterwards, and we will tonight as well, but it will not go as long as usual. I have a number of very, very pressing things that I have to do this evening. So I'm going to try to keep it to about a half an hour of discussion. So everyone, when you put in chats, keep in mind that we might not get to all of the chats tonight. We'll do our best. And second, we want to dedicate the class to Yitzchak ben Meir. And this is very significant because this series has been a long series. And we began and we'll probably end with a lot of material from this book that we've talked about many times, The Life and the Fire of the Baal Shem Tov by Yitzchak Buchsbaum. Well, it's his yurtzeit. The one who wrote this book, who is the source of many of the things that we've been learning, it's his yurtzeit. He wrote many other very, very good books. He was a devoted student of Reb Shlomo Carlebach. And Dara, one of our regulars, had a very close relationship with him. And at the end of the class, I'm going to call on her first to share some words. So our learning tonight is for an Aliyat Neshama of Yitzchak ben Meir, and especially thanking him for everything he did to help with these teachings. It's a classic book. It's an absolutely classic book. Hopefully everyone will get it. The Light and Fire of the Baal Shem Tov, Yitzchak Buchsbaum. Okay. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our learning of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, especially from the book Keter Shem Tov. We've been learning this for at least a month now, and we are continuing. Tonight, there's a common theme that is going to run through much of what we're learning tonight. I won't say everything, but there's a common theme, and he says it in the first one. It's very, very short, but he gives over the basic idea. And then, as we've discussed many times, Keter Shem Tov was not written by the Baal Shem Tov. These are students and students of students who heard over teachings from the Baal Shem Tov, either personally or they were students of those who heard it personally. And then these teachings were compiled into this sefer called Keter Shem Tov. And so sometimes, as we've seen, there's somewhat of repetition because different people are giving over, and many heard the same Torah, but maybe a little bit differently. So tonight we have a theme, and it's going to come out in this first Torah, which is Pei Zayin Aleph. Excuse me, Pei Zayin Aleph. And it says, the Shemati B'Shem Mori, the one who's writing this said, I heard in the name of my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, what the Arizal spoke about and clarified. And what was it? Limtak hadinim b'shorshan. How to, in the language of Kabbalah, how to sweeten judgments in their source. And he continues to say, Hayinu al yedei sheyimtza b'din shorish chesed. So how do we do this? We'll call this a Kabbalistic idea called sweetening the judgments. It's a term that comes off very often in Chassidut, sweetening the judgments. So the Baal Shem Tov learned from the Arizal and taught it over to his students that this is done through finding in judgments a source of chesed, some sort of loving kindness that is hidden in what appears to be a heavy judgment. Oh, na'aseh hakol chesed, or don't even look at it as judgment at all. You have to be on a very high level when things come down that are not pleasant, or feel negative, are judgmental, are difficult. So either we could find a point of chesed, loving kindness, positivity in this judgment, or don't even see it as judgment at all. See the whole thing as chesed. V'nimtak din b'shoresh chesed, zeh sheyimtza bo. That's how you sweeten the din, by finding chesed in the judgment. I had not planned to tell this story, but it just came to me. So that means I'm supposed to share it. It's a famous story. Many of you have probably heard this. One time, a man comes to the seer of Lublin, and he's having a really hard time with life, really difficult times. And he asked the Rebbe, do you have any advice for me? How do I deal with all of this? So he said, for that, you should go to Reb Zusha. So he goes to Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha later became a very famous rabbi in his own sense. And he was known to be extremely poor. So he came to Reb Zusha's house, and it was like this broken down shack. He comes in, there's like one table, a broken chair, and he's like, he can't believe someone is living in such poverty. And he says to Reb Zusha, the seer of Lublin sent me to you to learn how to deal with difficulties in life. And Reb Zusha said to him, what difficulties? I don't know what the Rebbe is talking about. What difficulties? So obviously that's what the Lubliner wanted this man to hear, is that it depends how you're going to look at things. From the outside, it looked like Reb Zusha was in dire straits. How could he live in such poverty? And yet Reb Zusha, he was like sincere. The man could tell he was for real. Like, what difficulties? God has done nothing but good for me. That's really the point here. The point here is we all have difficulties, sometimes 24/7. This is a world of trials and tribulations and difficulties. But it doesn't mean that we have to wallow in them. It doesn't mean that we have to be swallowed up by them. And it doesn't mean that we can't look for and actually believe that in every negative event in our lives, there has to be some goodness here that we can turn it around. So that's the first one we're learning, but we're going to see that there are many that are going to follow this theme through many, many different Torahs. The next one is Pei Zayin Bet, the next one, and begins that the Hiksha HaRamban, the Ramban, Nachmanides, had a difficulty. He asked a question. He asked a similar kind of question. How do we use prayer to turn judgment into goodness? How does prayer do that? Shinui Ratzon. So the Ramban didn't want to answer that we pray, we have a difficult situation, and then God will change the decree against us. Now, we do believe that that happens, but philosophically, the Ramban was bothered, and others also, we use the word fickle. Is God so fickle that he'll put us in a certain situation and then he'll change his mind? And we imagine billions of people are praying it every day. And so like God is continually changing his mind about everything. It's not the usual picture we think of God. So the Ramban wants to say that, no, we shouldn't think that. We shouldn't think that. Nonetheless, when we pray, we do pray that God will change a certain decree or judgment that we're going through, a friend is going through, a family member is going through. So he continues, Ubiyoter hamid palel avur chaviro. The same thing if he's praying for a friend. But Teirutz Mori, and now this person says that my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, gave an answer. B'Shem Rilbo, in the name of his teacher. Now, anytime it says that, it's referring to Achia Shiloni. Achia Shiloni was the heavenly mentor of the Baal Shem Tov. We talked in the beginning of the series, we talked a lot about the relationship between Achia Hashiloni and the Baal Shem Tov. So Achia Shiloni taught the Baal Shem Tov that actually one of the purposes of prayer is to sweeten judgments in their source. Like we just learned, how do you do that? By the person themselves, not in a sense trying to change God's mind, but trying to see what good can come out of this. Well, I don't have to look at this as just this black, terrible event happening. So the Baal Shem Tov says, Likshor dina malchut bebina. So now he gives it like a Kabbalistic answer that we know that in the four-letter name of God, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, the upper Hey is the sphere of Bina. The lower Hey is the sphere of Malchut. And Malchut, that's the lowest one. That's the place where judgments, we'll call it coalesce, because it's the lowest one. And it's as if judgments descend into Malchut. And Malchut is what we call the stage on which life plays itself out. So the Baal Shem Tov says that we can sweeten din by raising Malchut to Bina. In other words, that means it's a change of attitude, a change of worldview, of how we're dealing with a situation. The Shem hu adam acher. Listen to what the Baal Shem Tov says. Because, again, how do you sweeten judgments? It's not so much, and not that obviously we're not saying that if a person is going through a hard time, they shouldn't pray to God to help them. That's almost a given. But when you get into the philosophy of prayer, then the idea that the Baal Shem Tov is giving over, and it's not him alone, is that when a person, judgments change when a person changes. It's not like it's a magic wand that we're going to get God to change every decree. But if we become a different person, and that's Kabbalistically, that's what the Baal Shem Tov meant, from going from Malchut to Bina. Bina means understanding. So here, first we're hit with a heavy kind of judgment in our life. But through delving deeply into it, through introspection, through deep understanding, we can come to a place that we can turn the judgment around because we've changed. It's not so much that God changes, but we change. And he says, and even furthermore, ki hagezar din hu otiyot. Now the Baal Shem Tov brings in something that we're going to see in a couple of different Torahs here. He says that ultimately a decree are letters of the Hebrew letters. In other words, a desire, just like, let's say, in a court, the judge passes a sentence. Well, officially, he has to write it out. It can't be just he says, okay, you go to jail for 20 years and there's no written proof of anything. Everything has to be recorded. That's why you have a stenographer in every courtroom who is typing out every single thing that happens. So the Baal Shem Tov says when a decree of judgment comes down, it's enclosed in letters, in words. So he says, "V'yachol lashliach lasot siruf acher," and he says the one who is delivering the judgment can exchange the letters to read something else. What does he say? Mino tiyot elu mamash. Actually turn the letters around. So I'm going to go right to the next Torah because there he's going to explain what does this mean? That the decree is written in letters and the one delivering the letter can change it around. But here, it really, what it's saying is a person, as we said before, can rise from Malchut to Bina, meaning they're looking for some chesed, some compassion, some mercy, something good, something positive that could come out of the present situation. Or even learning to deal with it, not by putting a Band-Aid over it and saying, oh, this is good. There was a famous person, Rabbi Akiva's teacher, Gam Zula Tova, who said about everything, this is also for the good. This is also for the good. So yes, we have that ability, and that would be called sweetening the judgment. That's a classic example. Gam Zula Tova, this is also for the good. Rabbi Akiva learned this from his Rebbe, but he said it a little bit differently. He said, everything that God does is for the good. Even those things that apparently or initially seem to be right, the exact opposite of good. We're really being challenged here. It's really difficult. But Rabbi Akiva said, ultimately, this is also for the good. We just don't always understand what God's accounting is. So let's continue in the next one, Pei Zayin Gimel. And he's going to explain now. Zeh Shamar, so in other words, is really a continuation of the last one. We see in the story of Noach, where it says, Sohar ta'aseh l'teva. God told Noah, put a window in the side of the ark. Sohar means a window or a shining object. Make in the ark. Now we learned this many, many times that the word teva, ark, Noah's ark, the same word means a word. So the Baal Shem taught, make your words of Torah and Tefillah shine. Sohar. Let them shine. By letting them shine, then you can turn around any negativity. But he's going to get even more specific here. So he says that through permuting letters of words in a different order, he says, sheyafoch midat din lemidat rachamim. A person can turn judgment into compassion. And then he brings an example. It says in the Torah, "V'chi tavo milchama al tsar." When, this is in the book of Bamidbar, when, one second. No, it's in the book of Bamidbar. When an enemy comes against you, so it says, someone who is really causing you real problems. So here it says, Sohar ta'aseh teva, make your words of Torah and tefillah shine. Well, it turns out that the same letters of to make shine is the same root as an enemy who comes against you. Hatsar, like trouble, is hatsar. Well, it's the same letters as tsohar. So the Baal Shem, here we're getting very, we'll call it Kabbalistic here, dealing with the Hebrew language as a means of changing reality. So he says, so you can turn the tsar, the enemy, by switching the letters, and it becomes sohar. And the same letters also become rotseh, I want. In other words, between the lines, what the Baal Shem Tov is saying, by applying one's will to the task of turning challenges into opportunities, turning lemons into lemonade, you can do it by changing your attitude. But here he's just adopting a Kabbalistic way of looking at it by saying, by taking letters and permuting them. But what it's saying is changing your consciousness. So he continues and he says, Lakach eitza hayutza. This is the advice that is given. So in the Torah it says, what do you do when an enemy comes? So it says, here we're talking about in the camp. And so we're talking about the Torah says, so what do? You blow the shofar. You blow the shofar in order to let everyone know that there's an enemy that's coming against us, to gather people together, to be prepared to defend themselves. So that's what the Torah says. When an enemy comes against you, you should blow the shofar. Shehu to'ar simcha. But he points out that in many cases, the sound of the shofar is a very joyous sound. Sometimes it's just the opposite. It's a sign of danger. So here again, we have the same sound or the same action that can manifest in two different ways. We know this on Rosh Hashanah, that we have different sounds of the shofar, tekiah, shvarim, trua. And shvarim and trua usually are of danger, of warning, of pain. And tekiah is usually the joyous one, but not all the time. Sometimes a trua can be a joyous sound. So here he's just using an example. So he says, Hefech to'ar shofar shehu charada. That in this case, the sound of the shofar is trembling. But he says, Ve'al yedei shekibel b'simcha na'afoch mitzara to rotseh. that, again, through our attitude, we have the ability to turn challenge into opportunity. That's what the Baal Shem is saying here. And here, like I said, he's being a little bit Kabbalistic of trying to explain that when we pray, goes back to what the Ramban was saying. So how do we turn judgment and make it sweet? So here again, the Baal Shem is employing a Kabbalistic idea of permuting letters to indicate that what really is needed here is a change of attitude. We have to change our consciousness. And that's symbolized by permuting the letters different. We could take the letters of an enemy and turn it into an opportunity. That's what he's saying here. Okay, the next one is the same theme here. So here he brings an example of how we do this practically. And he brings an example of what's called Hatavada Chalom, that when someone has a bad dream and it really is bothering them, so we're told that gather 3 friends together and tell them, I've had like this bad dream and it's really bothering me. You don't have to tell them exactly the dream. And the 3 people say, it's a good dream. It is a good dream and it will be a good dream. I'm just paraphrasing. That's not the exact, there's a whole ritual here. The idea is the person feels they've had a bad dream and they need to like shake off the bad energy that it's causing them, either fear or they're scared or anticipating something terrible happen. And you go and they say, it's a good dream. It's a good dream. It actually says in the Gemara, I believe it was Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, better a bad dream than a good dream. So the commentary said, why would one want a bad dream over a good dream? So he explained, he said, a good dream most likely will have no effect on the person. The person had this nice little dream, they'll probably forget it in 2 seconds, and it will have no effect. If a person has we'll call it a bad dream, it's a wake-up call. But if the person wakes up to what the dream is trying to alert them to, they can make the changes that are needed and turn it from a bad dream to a good dream. Because now I know that from above, they're alerting me to something, or my subconscious or unconscious is telling me something. There's something I've been sweeping under the carpet that you better deal with. It's like festering. Deal with it. So that's why I said better a bad dream than a good dream. So here, the students of the Baal Shem Tov said the Baal Shem Tov brought this as an example of how to sweeten the judgments. Shehu lahamtik dino l'shorshon. That's how we sweeten the din. Kefi shnei perushim hanal. Echad kipshuto, keperush mori, b'shem rabo. L'kasher din amalchut labina. So he's just repeating it. This is a different student saying, again, this idea of going from malchut to bina. Don't wallow in the judgment. Raise your consciousness to bina. Try to figure out what you're being told here, how you can turn it into something good and positive. Then it continues. And he says, so this is fairly repetitious. The idea of finding chesed within din. Az limtaka din b'shorsh chesed, ze naaseh be'emet chesed. So here he adds a little twist that here we have a difficult situation. We're trying to find the silver lining in it. What can we get out of this? What can be positive about this? And he says it's not only finding a point of chesed, you could actually turn the whole situation into chesed. That's what's called sweetening the judgment at its root. Is at its root, we believe, like Rabbi Akiva said, everything that God does is for the good. So again, instead of like putting a Band-Aid over it and kind of like convincing ourselves somehow this must be good, but really having a hard time convincing ourselves to actually accomplish that, to see how we could see goodness in this. So everything we've learned up to now is very flowing, very uniform, the same kind of concept. Now we're going to introduce another idea, which is an extremely important idea, not so much for the specific Torah that he's giving over here, as I'll explain, but the model that comes out of it. Because the way that the Baal Shem Tov is going to learn this little piece here has been a major influence in Rabbi Ginsburg's type of teaching. And that I'll explain. So let's go through this, and then I'll explain the greater ramifications of what the Baal Shem Tov is saying, more than just the specifics. So he says like this, Sheyesh bi'adam eser sfirot, that every person has within them the 10 sfirot. This is not something we think of. The sfirot are out in the world. It's God's light shining in the world, and it's manifest all around us. Here the Baal Shem Tov says, not just around us. Each person has all 10 sfirot within them. Kihu olam katan, because a human being is a small world. Just like God creates the world through the 10 sfirot, these are the 10 expressions through which God created the world. And God said, let there be. And there was. The first one, Vayomer Elokim Yior, Vayior. God said, let there be light, and there was light. So there are 10 expressions like this, that God brought the world into being through speech. Well, these 10 mamarot are the 10 sfirot. And so a person is a small world. Just like the 10 sfirot are manifest everywhere, so are they within each person. Ukamoshe katuv arrived, ki ma sheyesh ba'olam hu gam kein b'shana b'nefesh adam. So here, this is talking about what it says in Sefer Yetzirah, that all of reality is made up of the following dimensions: olam, shana, and nefesh, meaning world, year, and body/soul. Olam means space, the 3 dimensions of space. Shana, year, means time. Nefesh means body, soul. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying every person has within them not just the 10 sfirot, also this idea of space, time, and soul. B'simancha har Sinai ashan. And he says, what is the sign to you? Like, where do we learn this from? So he says, this is what it means that when God gave the 10 commandments at Har Sinai, so it says that the mountain was full of smoke, ashan. So the question is, why do we need to know that the mountain was full of smoke? So the Baal Shem teaches, and this is something I got very excited when I learned this, because it's something I've given over probably hundreds of times, this idea of what's called ashan, the smoke. Because he says that the 3 letters of smoke is ayin, which means olam, shin, which means shana, and nefesh, which means soul. And this is used to explain that when God gave the Ten Commandments, all of the dimensions opened up. It was an experience called synesthesia, where all of the senses crossed. And as Rashi points out, that we could see what ordinarily could only be heard, and the opposite, we could hear what you ordinarily could only see. This is called synesthesia. It's an actual phenomenon that rare people have it, that our senses cross, and we can actually experience one sense through a different sense. So here he brings this idea. So why was I so excited? Because here in the Baal Shem Tov, he brings this idea of a shan from Har Sinai. And so it's like anytime you see something in its source, you might have learned something, but never saw what's called on the inside. And here, to connect it to the Baal Shem Tov, to me was very exciting. Now he goes on. Umadriga chona sheba'adam kagon sa'ar v'yisurim hu nikra midat malchut. Now we said this already. He says that the lowest of the sfirot within a person, this is the place where we have troubles, we have problems, we have challenges. And he says, and this is called the aspect of malchut. Shehi midat achrona. This is the lowest of the midot, the lowest of the sfirot. And then he quotes a verse that says, Ki ragleha yardot mavet, that her legs go down to death. And in Kabbalah, that is explained that one of the meanings here, that it's like a hint, a metaphor for how judgments gather in Malchut. That's the second class in a row I almost sneezed. You'll pardon me. So the idea of her feet go down to death. Malchut is always called the feminine. And here it says her feet, meaning that's the lowest of the sfirot. That's where judgments gather, which just means that life is full of judgments. Malchut is the stage on which life plays itself out. So here he is identified Malchut with this idea of challenges. Then he says, he goes up to Sfirot, and he says, Netzach v'hod shebadam hem amudei kayamin she'adam ma'amin emuna haborei al amtato. So above Malchut is really Yesod, but above Yesod is Netzach and Hod. Here, for whatever reason, he skips Yesod and he goes to Netzach and Hod. And he says, this is the place that a person, Netzach and Hod are always compared to the two legs. They're at the bottom of the Sfirot, and the Sfirot is in the image of a human being. And so Netzach and Hod are like the legs. So he says that Netzach and Hod are like the pillars on which a person's faith stands. Now he goes back to Yesod, and he says, Umida Yesod hu kisheyesh lo ta'anug ba'avodat Hashem Yibarach yoter mikol tanugim. Yesod is always connected to sexual energy, but here he just says that the aspect of Yesod, the attribute of Yesod, is that when a person has incredible pleasure from serving God, and that pleasure is greater than any other pleasure. So here, because it's in Yesod, which is usually connected to sexuality, ideally, sexuality is meant to be very, very pleasurable. But here he's saying that it's an awareness in a person that serving God through Torah and mitzvot, good deeds, is the greatest pleasure one can experience. And that's the whole Torah. So I'm going to go back to what I said before. Here we see the Baal Shem Tov is saying, first of all, within every person are the 10 sfirot. Not only that, within each person are all the dimensions of reality, space, time, and soul. And then he, for whatever reason, he talks about 4 of the sfirot, and he doesn't continue. It could be the person who heard this only heard part of the Torah, and actually the Baal Shem Tov continued and went through all of the sfirot and talked about them. Perhaps the Baal Shem Tov had been asked a question about these lower sfirot and was only dealing with this. But the reason I feel this is so important is, and some of you may be aware of this, I think it was 5, 6, 7 years ago already, Rav Ginsburg gave a monthly class in English. I think many of you know that most of Rav Ginsburg's teachings are in Hebrew, but for about 2, maybe even 3 years, on the first Sunday of the month, he gave over a full class in English, and it was broadcast all over the world. I had the great honor to be the MC of these. So if you go to YouTube, a lot of times you'll see me as part of these. Most of them, it was after I introduced Rav Ginsburg. And Rav Ginsburg many times was a few minutes late, so I had to fill up the time. So anyways, but why am I saying this is because many of these classes, he did what in my eyes is the most fascinating thing. He took different people in the Torah and he analyzed them through the Sfirot. In other words, what is the Keter of Avram Avinu? How can we see the sphere of Keter in Avram Avinu? And then what he would do is he would bring the stories of the Torah, the Midrashim, the Gemaras about Avram, and we could see, that's how Keter manifested itself in Avram Avinu. Then he would go to Chachma, and then Bina, and then he would go through all of the Sfirot, and at the end you got what was called, it's called a Partsuf, the full stature of the person. Because sometimes if I would ask you, what is Avram's Midah? What is his attribute? So everyone would answer rightfully Chesed. That is the aspect that is most associated with Avram Avinu. If I ask, what is Yitzchak's main attribute? Gevura. And of course, there's hundreds of Torahs based on these ideas. But what Rav Ginsburg did is he showed that, yes, Chesed, we could call it the main attribute of Avram, but he had every other attribute. And then he did Yitzhak and Yaakov and Moshe and Mashiach, David. He went through many, many, many different personalities. I'm hoping that one day it will be compiled into a book because it's all there. It just needs to be transcribed. So that's why this Torah from the Baal Shem Tov is so important. Because when we talk about the Sfirah, we tend to think of these mystical, Kabbalistic, kind of beyond worldly, but that's far from true. The world itself is a manifestation of God's light coming through the Sfirot. So everywhere we look, the Sfirot are manifest. But sometimes we don't think about in our own selves. And so every person has Chesed. Every person has gevura. Every person has chachma. Every person has bina. And so what Rav Ginsburg did, and it's not just with people that he does this. He will take a word and he'll show that the root of this word, how is this root connected to Keter? How is this root connected to Chachma? And so over the years, there are quite literally, I'll say hundreds for sure, there might even be thousands at this point. These kind of, they're called partsufim, models based on the Sfirot. And so, again, I was so excited to see in the Keter Shem Tov that the Baal Shem Tov was doing it the same thing. He was running the Sfirot through a person's experiences. So that's why I feel that this Torah is so instrumental, especially those who learn Rav Ginsburg. And he has something like 20 to 25 books in English for those who can't deal with the Hebrew. And you'll see in the English books, you'll see these partsufim all the time, these models, all the time. Okay, we'll do one more. And this is a bit on a different subject altogether. This is Torah Tzadi. So it says like this: Yesh b'china she'echad aloto lamala, chozer v'yored kedei la'alot hamadrigot hatachtonot b'sod rachatzti et ragli. Okay, so he says like this. First of all, introduce it, that we have a concept called Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah, descending in order to ascend. The most important of all of these is how the soul descends into a body in order to eventually come to a higher level than it began. This is the classic example of going down in order to go up. It's also brought that many times in life, because of the trials, tribulations, problems that we have, especially trying to help other people, that sometimes one has to go down in order to help someone come up. The classic example is used, and it comes from the Baal Shem Tov, that if a person is going along the road and he sees that his friend's carriage has sunk into the mud, and he has a choice. He could just keep on going, or he could stop and try to help him. Okay, he stops and he wants to help him. The only way he can help him is for him to go down into the mud with his friend and help move the carriage out of the mud. So that's the other example, that sometimes in life, we have to go down in order to go up. Now we have the opposite idea. This is all an introduction, so we'll understand this, which is just the opposite, which is called aliyah l'tzorach yerida, going up in order to come back down. Now, what does that mean? The most famous example that I could think of offhand is the Arba shenichnasu lePardes, the four that went into the Pardes, the four sages that went into this deep, meditative, mystical elevation of soul. And they reached this very, very high place. Without telling the whole story, because we don't have the time, it says only one of them went in peace and came out in peace. One died, one became a heretic, and one lost his mental balance. Only Rabbi Akiva was able to go in peace and come out in peace. And I learned from Rav Ginsburg, why only Rabbi Akiva? And so he said that because when Rabbi Akiva went up, he had in mind that the purpose of the going up was to bring down whatever I'm going to learn and to integrate it in here in this world. So now, having said that, we can now understand this. So he says that here he gives an example of a person who elevates themselves to a high place and then comes down, and he uses what he learned in this high elevated experience to lift up the lower worlds, because that was his purpose. And he says that's what it means in Shir HaShirim. I have washed my feet. How can I get them dirty again? So he's saying what the Baal Shem Tov says means, I've washed my feet, means I've had this very elevated experience. How can I apply it now in this very physical, material, blemished world? How can I get my feet dirty again? That's how the Baal Shem explains this verse in Shir HaShirim. He continues, V'zeh sod ratzov v'shov. So the Baal Shem says that what we're talking about here is the secret called running and returning. This is something we've learned scores of times, this dynamic of going out and coming back in. This is the life beat of the heart, of our pulse, of our breath, of the tides, AC, DC. The whole world is based on this dynamic of running and returning, running and returning. So he's just pointing out this idea of going up and coming down is the same thing as running and returning. And then he says, V'nikra katnut v'gadlut. Now he introduces another concept from right out of the Arizal that's called katnut, means from the word katan, small. Here it means small-mindedness. V'gadlut means big, expanded consciousness. So here is the same thing. You have this very deep, high, beautiful experience, and you have an expanded consciousness. Well, how do you bring it back into this world, which is made up of a lot of small-mindedness? How do you do that? So he says, "Ubechol yiridat tzarich azhara ech lachzor v'la'alot shelo yishar chas v'shalom." So he says like this. Here we're learning run and return, going down in order to come up, coming up in order to go down. So the Baal Shem says, just you have to be very careful that when you come back down, you have to warn yourself that you have to know how to go back up again and not get stuck down below again. In other words, Ratzov v'shov is a constant dynamic. There is no such thing as I go up once, I have an experience, and I come back down to the world, and I'm done. So, no. Elevating oneself and going back down, it's a constant. It's a constant flow. So he's just saying, if you went very high, and now you came back down, think, okay, it's done. I'm down here. I'm stuck again. He says, no, don't think like that. He even says, chas v'shalom. And this person who's giving it over says, and the Baal Shem Tov gave a few of examples of people who did go very, very high, and when they came back down, they got stuck. They never could go back up again. So this is, again, a very fundamental teaching of the Baal Shem, because we all have our ups and downs daily. Maybe they're not as dramatic. The dramatic ones maybe don't come as often, but if we really look at our moods as we go through the day, it's a constant movement of aliyot and yeridot, of ascensions and dissensions. And so the Baal Shem is just saying, if you ascend, bring it down and do good with it. But your work isn't over. Don't get stuck. You have many other opportunities to go up and come down. But when you go up, don't get stuck in the up. That's what 3 of the 4 that went into the Pardes did. They got stuck in what was revealed to them, or what revelation came to them, and they were never the same again. They didn't know how to bring it down properly. Only Rabbi Akiva, because he had in mind already not to get caught in what we're going to call the high, in the experience. Everyone wants instant experience today. That's the name of the game. Everything has to be like instant, and it has to be perfect, it has to be good, and that's it. So that's our learning for tonight. May we all be blessed to know this dynamic, to running and returning, rising and falling in the proper way, how to go down into the mud to help someone when we need to. But again, don't get stuck there. Don't get stuck in the mud. Okay, as I said before, that we will have a discussion group, and I need to cap it around a half an hour. And I'm going to unmute everyone, and I'm going to call on Dara first, because we were dedicating this learning to Yitzchak ben Meir. And I know that Dara wants to say a few words. Let me just start recording. Oh, excuse me, 1 second.